As a producer these days, it's really easy to accumulate like thousands and thousands of different sounds from all over the world, especially, one-shot drum sounds, so that we can get, a wide array of different sounds to be creative with, which is great. It's the power of the internet, right? But one of the issues I think that we run into is that back in the day, we used to have this sense of cohesion with the stuff that we would record because, for example, a drum kit would be the same drummer in the same room and you'd have room mics and stuff to blend everything together, but we're picking and choosing from all these different packs, and so they kind of lack that cohesion. So today I want to give you guys some really good strategies that you can use in your DAW to help mitigate those issues and bring everything together, both in terms of how they sound with themselves and how they sound with your song. So let's jump in. If you've ever just like laid down some chords and then you're like, okay, I want to put some drums on this now, and you start rifling through some of the sounds in your library, you'll notice that some of the sounds seem to fit better than others. And I think a lot of it has to do with the tuning of the drums in relation to the tuning of the song. So tuning is the first thing that we're going to look at here. So I'm just going to go through my sounds and pick a random kick, a random snare, and a random hat. We're going to make them sound better together than they were to start with. So here are the random sounds that I picked. And then I just made like a real basic groove for us to work with as we make some of these changes. The first tool that we're going to use is Voxengo Span. So I'm going to put this on the kick right now. It basically just gives us a chance to freeze the spectrum and try to analyze parts of what's happening in the frequency response of this particular sound. So I'm going to solo the kick here. And now if I press this hold button, we're going to freeze the frequency response, and so we can start analyzing it a little bit. So you can see that there's a lot of energy in this lower area here, which is the oomph of the kick here. And it looks to me like, the peak of it is about 73.5 hertz, which translates to, you can see the key to the right of where it tells you the hertz. So roughly translates to about D. What I'm going to do is I'm just going to mark that down as D so we can remember. Now, if I pull open an EQ and we exaggerate that a little bit, we can start to hear what you might call the fundamental frequency of the kick. So let's go ahead and do the same little exercise here with the snare. It looks like this fundamental is about F sharp and 185 hertz. And let's also do the same thing with the hat. Span tells us that this is currently a G sharp here. So what I'm going to do with this information is I'm going to try to match the snare and the hat to the key of the kick. And so I'm just going to highlight these snare clips, and if we're just looking at like a keyboard, we need to move the snare down a few semitones to match the key of the kick, which is currently in D, given our fundamental frequency. So we need to move it down by 3 semitones. So what I'm going to do is highlight these clips, and we're going to go to our pitch area here and just go down by 3 semitones and see how this jives with the kick. So now those are both in the same key, and I actually kind of like that deep snare sound. So let's try to do the same thing with our hat here. If we go from G sharp to a D, we can either go up 6 semitones or down 6 semitones to match the key of D. So let's try to do either one of those. Now, if you don't really want that deep hi-hat sound, what you can do is actually go somewhere in the middle. So instead of matching the key exactly as we have it here, so the key of D, you can actually use the keys that are a fifth or a fourth above or below whichever key you're in. If the fundamental frequency of the hat is G sharp, that means we only need to go up 1 semitone for it to be a fifth and down a semitone for it to be a fourth. So let's try that instead. I'm going to go up 1 and see how this sounds. So let's compare it with what it sounded like before. And after. So you can kind of hear that it starts to really dial in a little bit here. One little trick that I like to use is to exaggerate the fundamental frequency of each of our sounds to make it sound even more dialed in, because, that effect is magnified. Now, another important tool that we have is to process the drums as a whole. So what I really like to do is use saturation and compression and EQ together to make things sound like, you know, they were all part of the same cohesive production, right? So what I like to do first is add some saturation to the drum bus here. And this is just going to be like a sort of an analog style saturation. Because what's actually happening here is that the kick is driving the saturation the most. And when the kick drives the saturation, it also kind of saturates the hat even more. And so they all start to sound like they belong together a little bit better. The next thing you might want to do is have a parallel compression return or aux track set up already. I like to use this glue compressor from Ableton, but feel free to use any sort of bus compression that you like. And what I'm going to do is send our drum bus to this. I'm really smashing it here. Like it's like 12 to 15 decibels because you're just, you know, you're blending them together. Now the last thing I like to do is add some sweetness with EQ, or to take away some potential issues that you hear. But as long as you're doing it on the drums bus, that's what's gonna make a huge difference. So this is maybe gonna be sort of genre dependent, but like if I'm working on like a lo-fi track, it's really nice to low pass all the drums at the same, like with the same EQ curve at the same point, right? So you could go like this. And also, instead of doing it on the drums bus, you can actually use that parallel compression track to your advantage by just sweetening up the parallel compression on its own. And that will have a really nice impact on how cohesive all of these are together. So check this out. So if you want those like really scooped sounding drums, so if you think about just a recorded acoustic drum kit, all of the drum sounds are in the same space. And so we can take that idea and apply it to our own drums to help kind of fool our ears into thinking that they were recorded or played in the same space, right? What I like to do is have another send set up just for this very purpose. I'm gonna use a convolution reverb here, and feel free to play around with different impulse responses. Like we could do a drum booth reel, for example. And what I'm gonna do is just make sure I'm sending my drum bus to our convolution reverb here, and I'm gonna solo the convolution reverb so you can hear it. Really short here. Now let's unsolo the reverb and you can listen to it together in the mix. Let's look at a different one here. Let's look at overhead mics. Now what we're gonna do is bring the decay way down. Convolution reverb is really nice when you want to emulate those like real spaces, so I highly recommend giving this a shot. So even though a lot of times we're working with sounds that are all over the place and they sound like they're all over the place, there's lots of different ways that you can address this issue and make things sound a little bit more cohesive and better, I think, for the listener. So if you do have any questions, please let us know down below. I'd be happy to answer. And as always, happy music making, and we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.